Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Behind the Stripes football webcast. This is Tribune sports editor Joe Wall-Jasper along with Tribune football beat writer David Morrison. David, Missouri coming off a 24-14 victory over Vanderbilt on homecoming. I guess if there was any big news coming out of this, what was kind of a blah game, it was that the offense did do a little better. They pile up 385 yards. Did this seem to you like a signal that maybe some of the offense's mystery ailments have been cured, or was this a one-day bit of fun against a opponent that's really struggling?
I think the answer lies somewhere between those two extremes. It's definitely not cured, and I think in the run game at least, I feel like with the way the line was getting pushed and playing against Vanderbilt, they would have had a good day against most of the league. You know, it seemed like the line, at least on the ground, kind of figured some stuff out. It was running to the right. It was trying to get outside the tackles, and if not, at least trying to fit between kind of the guard tackle, gap and kind of trying to extend the field that way. It was pulling Connor McGovern a whole lot. I think they're realizing that Connor McGovern might be their best run blocking offensive lineman, so they're just basically, telling him to plow or pave the way and have the running backs run behind them. So I think they're figuring out what works in the run game for them. And I think, like I said, they would have had a good day against anybody on the ground with how they were playing against Vanderbilt. I mean, it is true Vanderbilt's one of the worst defenses in the league, so that good day turns into 250 yards, but I think it would have been comparable against anybody else. The pass game, it's still bad. Matty Mock,
as bad.
Well, but comparatively, it might be as bad because Matty Mock, he completed 11 of 23 passes against a team that gives up 64% completion on the year. So I mean, it's a very bad, lenient pass defense that he still struggled to complete half his passes against. And again, it's never all Matty Mock. There were two pretty terrible drops. Sean Colkin had one, Bud Sasser had one, but still, there's plays where they set up the screen. Russell Hansborough's out in the flat with nobody but blockers in front of him, and Matty Mock throws it to a 15-foot tall man that's not there. Well over his head. I mean, so he's still struggling with the touch, and he's still struggling with knowing when to throw the ball away, when to kind of, I guess, just decision making. Like his third intentional grounding call in 4 weeks. He rolled out. Colkin was open for a second, but he didn't throw it. Then he still didn't throw it, and then he ended up having to kind of toss it forward and didn't get to the line. It was intentional grounding. So I think the pass game didn't take many steps forward, if any, but I think they're figuring out some stuff on the ground that could possibly help the pass game in the future.
I think that you have to figure in that Vandy is a team. They gave up 37 points to Temple, they gave up 31 to UMass, and they gave up 20 to Charleston Southern and almost lost at home to an FCS team. So I don't think anybody is debating the fact that Vandy is a pretty poor defense. I think some of the running that, you could get outside on Vandy, whereas you couldn't against Florida. I think when we saw Russell Hansborough try to bounce anything against Florida, you saw that wasn't going to work. So I think some of what they did maybe won't translate against a good defense, but I think the good news is Missouri doesn't really face a good defense from here on out. So to a certain extent, I don't think their problems are fixed. I think it's just going to be a week-to-week thing where you're going to be wondering, is this going to be another one of those weird, bizarre box score days where it looks like, a lopsided high school game? But I know he didn't have a great game, but I think Matty Mock maybe at least got a little confidence back with what he did in that game, even the last touchdown, which, I think when you're watching the game, it's sort of surprised suddenly they're throwing a pass in that situation because they could have come pretty close to running the clock down there. But if that gave him some confidence, all the better for Missouri, I suppose, because 11 for 23 before 140 yards, whatever it was, isn't a great day, but compared to the previous three, it was quite a bit better. So it was what it was. It was really kind of just a dull, unimpressive game that Missouri won by 10 points.
Yeah,
I guess we still have a few minutes to kill, so we'll move on to item number 2.
Well, and it seemed as if, at least with Mock, they seem to be getting a little better feel of when they want to use him in the run game, too. Yeah. I mean, because the last 2 weeks on 3rd and long, they've just kind of
he was effective earning quarterback draws. A couple big, I think the right before his first touchdown pass to Saz, he had a big scramble on 3rd and long. It wasn't a scramble, it was a quarterback draw.
Yeah, and that was 2 weeks in a row on 3rd and very long that they've said, well, let's just put it in Mock's hands on the ground and see what he can do. And he's gotten first downs both times. So I think I guess he's building a little more confidence in the coaching staff of when they want to use him in the run. And I think they're figuring out when they can kind of deploy that weapon without having him run 10 times in a drive like James Franklin would or something like that.
Well, we talked about the Florida game that while it was sort of an interesting way to win a game, it was completely unsustainable to get all those turnovers and returns for touchdowns. Was this maybe a more sustainable vision of how Missouri could win games going forward, considering the caliber of their competition, which is not great? There are probably a lot of toss-up games coming up here in the last 4. They ran the ball at basically a 2-to-1 ratio over passes. They did not turn the ball over, and they played good defense. I mean, is that something you think that is sort of their blueprint moving forward?
I think it could be. I mean, especially looking at the competition. I mean, of the 4 teams that remain, 3 of them are in the bottom 4 in the SEC in run defense, and Arkansas is in the bottom half. They're 8th in Texas A&M, Tennessee, and Kentucky are all, in the 11 to 14 range. So, I mean, they're bad run defenses that they can possibly get a lot of real estate on the ground against. They're not very opportunistic defenses, except for Kentucky, which actually they've got 13 interceptions on the year, and they are towards the top of the league in turnover margin and stuff like that. But besides them, they're not very opportunistic defenses. And then, the offense, it might be difficult to play as good on defense as they have the last couple weeks. I mean, Vanderbilt and Florida are terrible offenses, whereas Kentucky's shown it can be pretty explosive. Texas A&M, unless they're playing Alabama, is going to be pretty good on offense, and even Tennessee and Arkansas have had their moments this year. But I mean, Missouri's also shown that it can do well against pretty good offenses. South Carolina and Georgia are both pretty good offenses, and except for wearing down against Georgia because they were on the field for 45 minutes, they played pretty well. So I think this could be a sustainable model. The defense in SEC play has shown that it's a strong point this year. It's not something to be overcome. It's something that's actually helping them win games. And then the defenses that Missouri is going to face down the stretch are kind of conducive to running against them and kind of playing it safe and not putting a lot of, I guess, balls up for grabs or trying to take chances against them. So, I mean, this does seem like a model that could work. I don't know if that means they're going 4-0, but I mean, it's something that I think can keep them in these games down the stretch.
Well, I think Missouri's got a better defense than anybody they play in the next 4 games. I think their special teams are a strength, too, between Christian Brinzer, our star in the golden age of punting, and the punt return game is really good, and the kickoff return game is good. So I think in special teams, they're going to have an advantage over most teams they play. Defense, they're going to have an advantage over every team they play, unless they get matched up in the SEC championship game. So those, 2 out of 3 phases, it's just a matter of can the offense be adequate or, average. I think that's kind of what they're gunning for here. As far as the run-to-pass ratio, I think it makes sense for this team what they did in that game. It is a little dependent on, they average about 5 yards a carry. And if you're getting 3 yards a carry, then you don't have much choice but to try to throw the ball a little bit more. I'm kind of an advocate of throwing the ball. I think the less dangerous passes for him to throw are more the deeper balls on the sidelines anyway. So you get some big plays out of those once in a while. They got a couple. He got one 35-yard to Jimmy Hunt, and then he had the one at the end, a 25-yard to Bud Sasser. Those are probably his better passes than what you would normally think of as a safe pass. They really have sort of abandoned the idea of passing over the middle the last few weeks, I've noticed, which might be for the best. Lastly, now, the Kentucky game coming up, I think, this game, like the 3 that will follow it, is going to be considered basically a toss-up type game. It's at home for what that's worth, which for Missouri is not much. It may even be worse. They do face a quarterback, Patrick Towles, who threw for 390 yards and ran for 76 against the number 1 team in the nation. So a bit of a concern there, I would assume.
Yeah, I mean, he might be the best quarterback they've faced this year so far. I mean, Dylan Thompson's putting up pretty good numbers at South Carolina, but he hadn't done much against Missouri in each of the last 2 years. So I don't know if that's a function of maybe he's inflating the numbers against lesser competition, or maybe Missouri hasn't figured out. But I think with Patrick Towles is kind of, on par with Dylan Thompson is probably the best
in the East.
Yeah, the best quarterbacks they've faced this year. Obviously they'll get Kenny Hill later, and he's pretty stout. So, I mean, so far it seems like Towles is right up there as one of the best they've faced. And like you said, it's not just the passing. He's a big, strong-armed quarterback, and they like to take shots downfield, but he can also run the zone read, and you can also hurt him on the ground as well. He's like, I guess he would be Jeff Driscoll's aspirational figure, you know? He would be the guy that Jeff Driscoll thought he could be coming out of high school all those many moons ago before all the doubt crept in and the abyss, you know, swallowed him up. But anyway, so I think Kentucky is a very dangerous matchup for them just because they haven't faced a potent offense like this in a month now. You know, they haven't faced it since Georgia. And, you know, they did a good job against Vanderbilt and Florida, but they were not good offenses. So it's going to be interesting to see if the defense can sustain this level of play against an offense like Kentucky that can get you in a lot of different ways. You know, they spread you out, they run fast. They run no huddle, things like that. They've got a pretty
and that
good,
does give Missouri some trouble. They haven't faced much tempo in the last few weeks.
Since Indiana, basically, which was probably one of the defense's worst games of the year. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be a different look for them from the last 3 or 4 weeks, and yeah, I think it's kind of a good. I guess Kentucky's getting Missouri at a fairly good time. You know, they're coming off a very good showing against Mississippi State, which that 14 points isn't really indicative because there was a onside kick run back for a touchdown for the final margin and things like that. And Missouri's kind of coming off an underwhelming win over Vanderbilt. So yeah, I think, you know, this could be their second toughest game on the rest of the schedule. I mean, maybe it and Arkansas are kind of vying for that spot behind A&M. And yeah, I think, you know, Kentucky's getting them at a pretty good time to be a good test for them.
Now, when Missouri's on offense, this was a team that last year, this was Matty Mock's last start for Missouri, and he had a good game against them. He threw, I think it was like 17 of 28 for 200 and some yards, and threw 5 touchdown passes, 4 of them to Dorial Green Beckham. So obviously that doesn't really translate, but. What Kentucky did last year defensively was they kind of got out of their normal kind of cover 2 or sometimes cover 4 scheme and just got right on top of the line of scrimmage and pressed man and sort of dared Missouri to throw, which he did well. After that game, Mark Stoops said that really it was kind of a matter of if we stayed in our cover 2 defense, Missouri was just going to run the ball all over us. I don't know that you have the same concern this year with Missouri's line and Missouri's running backs as you did then, but you still might want to see if Matty Mock can beat you through the air. So it'll be interesting to see if they get off scheme, you know, to try to stop Missouri in the same way, or if they kind of just play their way and see if Missouri can beat them with a combination of the run and pass. All right, well, tune in next week when we will see if Missouri has improved to 7-2